Hi everyone, Adam here. So today's topic is a little bit uh, not necessarily just fitness related, it's related to a lot of things. It's about research. It's about what kind of research is good, what kind of research is bad, etc. I saw a really good post yesterday. A Dr. James Coyne, I believe his name was, and essentially what it explored was how in many cases a lot of these essentially psychology papers, particularly meta-studies, which are essentially studies of studies, revealed huge errors in the way people do things. And this is kind of well known. There's a lot of silly garbage that goes on when it comes to research. And it's not necessarily people being dumb, it's not necessarily people being purposefully malicious, it's just sort of psychologically the way things end up happening for a lot of people. And the reason is this. So you have a study, and it's easy to get funding for studies that are new or studies that have, very promising results or suggest, something in an interesting direction. And it's much harder to get funding for a study that basically rehashes an old study, retests an old study to see if its results are actually typical or if they happen to get, bad data that, gave them a result that they wouldn't normally have gotten. So very little stuff is actually double-checked the way it should be, which unfortunately is a problem because that's the whole basis of science is, reproducibility. You test something, if it, gives you a certain result, you test it again a few more times, make sure that that's the normal result you can expect out of that, scenario. And then, from there, that, gives you good scientific data on what you should do in the future based on, again, what you've seen with this data in the past. Unfortunately, it's very hard, again, to get funding to retest things, so of course, people are simply not doing that. There's very little of that double checking, which should be happening that's not. There are papers that are very, there are studies that are very poorly designed. Some studies have very small sample sizes, which is, basically useless because it doesn't, if you have a very small sample size, you have no clue if, basically you're getting an average result, or if you're just getting some kind of noise on either end of the spectrum, which isn't really indicative of what, the average result should be. And then you have, these meta-studies, which are studies of studies. Essentially, a meta-study, what they do is they say, here's our inclusion criteria. So there are certain criteria that studies have to meet for them to be included in this meta-study. You take all the studies that fit that criteria, and then you take that and you sort of combine all of the sample sizes of all of those studies together to essentially create one bigger study. And that's cool because it helps overcome a lot of the problem of having these small sample sizes. It makes it easy to get a lot of people into one study or, into one, area of study so that you can then say, okay, well, here is, what the overall data is telling us in a much bigger, sense, in a much bigger picture. So you could have 10 studies and, maybe 8 of them say that, something does nothing. One of them says it has really amazing benefits. One of them says it has, virtually, very negative, very negative results. And so someone might be able to cherry pick one of those, 2 studies on either end and say, okay, here's what this thing does. A bunch of people might be able to find, a bunch of those studies in the middle that say it doesn't really do much of anything. But then you take that meta study, it says, okay, here's what all the data involved looks like, and overall, it looks like when you include even those outliers a little bit, it doesn't really do anything. Unfortunately, that's not the way many meta-studies are designed. Many meta-studies have very bad inclusion criteria. Many meta-studies are not designed properly. And essentially the problem that this article was looking into was that many of these studies simply, many of these meta-studies simply were not designed properly and, it said very little or were very misleading or, drew conclusions that were way out of line with what the evidence was actually saying. And again, this was in the field of psychology, so again, it's different. It's not, we're not talking about fitness, we're not talking about health right now. But it's that kind of issue is common, again, even for real researchers, even for real scientists who have degrees, who study this stuff, that sort of thing is, it happens. And unfortunately with psychology, as he points out, a lot of these, these psychology institutions, yeah, obviously they have a vested interest in making their form of therapy, their livelihood, seem effective, seem useful, seem important, and so they are far more likely, to sort of support these bogus meta studies, to to overlook their flaws in order to push something that they can work with, something that works for them. Of course, this is extremely the same when it comes to the fitness industry. In the fitness industry, you'll have people that'll bandy about every study that they can find that supports, whatever belief that they have, even if, again, that study is an outlier, it doesn't actually give us a good picture of the overall data. Again, just so that they can have a specific niche and they can sell a particular fitness product, whether that's themselves or some kind of diet plan or some kind of exercise plan or, whatever. You are a product as well. But yeah, the point is that it's important to realize that there are when some people are anti-science in the sense that they think it's not telling us anything, or they think that science is misleading us, and the reality is simply that the science is not misleading us oftentimes. It's that we're dealing with very, very, very precise, very fuzzy systems, and it's hard. It's extremely hard to get a picture of every single little thing that makes us tick and everything that goes together. And people are naturally a little bit lazy. If you take a paper and you cite it, are you gonna read? You're gonna sit down and read the whole paper to figure out exactly what it says and exactly what the data is saying? Well, no, most people won't. I mean, there's certainly studies that I've not bothered to sit down and read all of. So what happens is people take the summary of the study, they take it at their word, they say, okay, well, this study says this happened. I'm gonna trust that. Maybe the fact is that the data did not quite say what they thought it said, or maybe they were a little bit misled by the data. Maybe there are some obvious flaws in the way the data was gathered, and so the study, again, didn't quite show what they claim it showed. And then, again, you take that study uncritically, you take that summary, you say, bam, here you go, proof. Proof that, X or Y or Z. And, again, everyone's guilty of it. It's not like it's that people are malicious. It's not that, I mean, some people are malicious, but most people are generally not malicious. They see these studies and they don't quite understand exactly the way science works. They don't understand how studies can be flawed and what studies do say and what they don't say and how to tell the difference. And they just get confused because studies seem to be telling them conflicting things. They seem to believe again, we always latch on to things that we already believe. We're more likely to accept something if it confirms our biases, our assumptions about the world. So, even if there are, again, in that previous example, 8 studies saying something does nothing, and one saying it does something, and one saying it does something bad, if we already believe or have a hunch that it does something good, we're going to find that one study where it does something good, and we're going to say, haha, see, this is the one. So yeah, I mean, and it's important, like you have all these people that argue about like facts are facts. The facts don't lie. Well, yeah, but facts are very, they can be very misleading. They can be very complicated for sure. And we, as human emotional people, can be very bad at rounding up exactly what the facts say and really doing all the research and the diligent work and going through all the literature and piling up every single little piece of info that we can. It's a long and exhausting process. And so very often we take shortcuts. And we take those shortcuts, and again, those shortcuts can leave big gaps in our knowledge and our thinking. And that can lead to, again, a situation in which we have these very misleading recommendations on what we should be doing, whether it's exercise, or whether it's diet, or whether it's psychotherapy, whatever it is. I will link the paper to you, of course. It's a little bit long, it's a little bit complicated, it's a little bit esoteric, but it's an excellent, excellent post, and I really enjoyed reading it. It really, again, pushed on how entangled these things can get when we have financial gain coming into the equation, when we have human natural laziness, human willingness to confirm our biases or assumptions about the world. And yeah, just an excellent post. I hope that I've said some useful things here too. I mean, I hope that you've taken something away from this, that you understand a little bit more about how science works. Science. I don't know why I just put that in quotes. Anyway, as always, like, comment, share, tell me what you want to see in future videos. I'll talk to you guys next time. Have a good one.